So Kemi Badenoch, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She is the leader of the Conservative Party in the UK. And the more I see of her, the more I like her. She was on Piers Morgan the other day, and he raised a number of issues that I found worth talking about. They talked a little bit about free speech. In this clip that I'm going to show you, they talk a little bit about Israel, and we're going to talk about that. And then they talk about her personal faith, and that's where I thought there was something very much worth touching on. So let's just go through this clip. I'll stop it a couple times, and yeah, she's interesting. I like her a lot. Let's take a look.
I believe in free speech, but I am concerned about the free speech of people in this country. I don't think that we are giving international rights for people to come to our country to exercise their free speech.
We've been jailing people, for example, for Facebook posts and so on. Do you agree with that?
So people should not be, in my view, jailed for Facebook posts unless they are breaking the law very clearly. I am someone who believes in free speech, but free speech has its limits. You can't defame people. You can't incite violence or hatred. But I have also been very vocal about what is happening to British Jews in our country. There's clearly been a climate of intimidation and incitement to violence happening with a lot of those protests. I think that's the sort of place where you draw the line. That, yes, have free speech, but you don't use it to hurt other people. Your rights stop when someone else's rights begin. So when I'm Prime Minister, I want to be able to stop bad people from coming to our country. I don't know the reasons that Labour gives to the people that it does stop, but that right to stop people who are not conducive to the public good from coming to the country, I think is an important one for a government to exercise.
Are you...
Okay. What she's talking about here, I made a video about this a few days ago, that the Home Office, which is like the Interior Ministry, is what we call it here in Israel, the Home Office in the UK prevented Cenk Uyghur and his nephew Hassan Piker, who are virulently anti-Israel. Hassan Piker's even worse than Cenk in the stuff that he says, but they're really anti-Israel and in a very harsh way. I would call them, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, whatever term you want to use. I don't like throwing that around. But for whatever reason, they were prevented from entering the UK, and they made a huge stink about it, about how Israel's preventing them from entering the UK. Never mind the fact that a whole bunch of right-wing and even numerous pro-Israel prominent figures were prevented from entering the UK just a couple weeks before that, on the same grounds that it would not be conducive to the public good. And she makes a very important point that we always have to remember. People always bring up the issue of free speech if they're getting silenced, like their voices getting shut down in media, or in this case, that they're not being allowed into a certain country. You don't have an inalienable right to go into any country you want. That's not a right. Freedom of speech means that you cannot police what people say in your country. But if you don't want people coming into your country, that's totally fair. Israel also frequently prevents people from coming into the country if they're well-known anti-Israel activists. And it's not an infringement on anyone's rights. It's just, you don't have a right to go into any country you want. It's a good point. All right, it gets a little more interesting right here. So Piers is about to respond to what she just said about the Jewish community and the need to protect the Jewish community, her concern for the Jewish community, which is admirable. He responds to it by bringing up Israel.
Comfortable fully aligning yourself to an Israeli government that has people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who, to put it bluntly, I view as psychopaths?
So I am aligning myself with Jewish people in our country. I don't align myself with particular... Yeah, well, yes, but where did you...
Well, if you were Prime Minister of this country, yes, you would have to make public statements about the Israeli government. Given the way that certain members of that government behave now, or what we see with our own eyes, would you be comfortable fully supporting that government?
So let's remember, Israel is an ally of the UK.
Sure.
There will be all sorts of people who will be in any foreign government, Israel or elsewhere, that I might not be comfortable with, might dislike their views. But when I was Trade Secretary, I saw how Israeli intelligence helped protect British citizens and this country. They are fighting a lot of battles, which are really fights for Western values. And I think that when you look at what happened on October 7th, the massacre that happened, really horrific stuff, which I even find uncomfortable thinking about, knowing what I've read about, what I saw, that I understand why they are in a fight for their survival. If there are specific things...
But do you feel comfortable about the scale of the response in, say, Gaza and now in Lebanon? Are you Are you comfortable about that?
So I know that mistakes have been made, but I can also see that Israel takes actually quite a lot of care in targeting people. So I disagree when people call it a genocide. It's a war. All death, is something which I think should be avoided. I think Israel actually takes care to try and target the specific people.
But they're killing a lot of civilians in the process.
Because Hamas uses the civilians as human
Is that a
shields.
good enough excuse eventually? If it looks like eventually we hear from Ben Gvir and Smotrich what they really want to do is kick all the Palestinians out of Gaza
so
and the West Bank?
I don't know him and I don't know what he said, so I can't comment on that. I do think it is wrong that Hamas uses innocent civilians as human shields. That is what has caused a lot of the scale of the violence. You look at what they did with Hezbollah and the pagers. You look at the very precise targeting in Iran. I believe the Israeli government, when they say they do everything they can to minimize human life, Hamas does not do that. And even Palestinians will say that Hamas is the biggest oppressor of Palestinian people. Getting rid of Hamas, I think, is important. It is a terrorist group. That's the issue, I think, with the guest on your show. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. He has said that he prefers. Yeah, he has said that he prefers Hamas to Israel. Hamas is a terrorist group.
He's always condemned Hamas to me.
But I was told that he had said that. And I just don't want people who support terrorist groups coming to our country.
Yeah, he's not a Hamas supporter. That would be a mischaracterization. Okay. Two quick things before we wrap up. It's been very interesting talking to you. Don't leave us along next time.
Okay. First of all, when they were talking about Cenk Uygur did, in fact, say that if it was a choice between voting for Israel or voting for Hamas, he'd vote for Hamas every time. That was the exact quote. But that's not what I want to talk about here. Piers brings up a couple of things here that reveal a common but serious confusion. First of all, he called the human shields, when she brought up that Hamas uses civilians as human shields, he brought it up as an excuse. It isn't. It is a legal and military reality that directly determines how casualty figures need to be interpreted and how international law actually judges a military response. Kemi wasn't offering a rhetorical dodge. She was pointing to something that is extensively documented, including by the Henry Jackson Society, which is a UK-based think tank, which published what it describes as the missing chapter in all the major UN NGO reports on Gaza. The UN has issued upwards of 400 reports on the Gaza Strip since October 7th. I don't know the exact number. In all of them, human shields are mentioned exactly 4 times, always mentioning it as an allegation by the Israelis and an unverified claim. Not once does the UN dedicate even a single paragraph to analyzing how Hamas actually fought the war. It's a blind spot that's built into the whole framework of how the conversation goes. And of course, UN reports, and I talked about this in another recent video, UN reports are accorded all this credibility. So people view them as kind of the official report. Now, Hamas systematically embedded, I'm just going over things you already know, Hamas systematically embedded military operations inside civilian infrastructure, in hospitals and schools and mosques and residential buildings. This is not disputed by anyone. It's the core reason that civilian casualties occur in urban warfare against an enemy that deliberately uses its own population as cover. And when you dismiss that as an excuse, you're inadvertently absolving Hamas of one of the clearest war crimes in modern armed conflict. Now, he also talks about how what Israel has done has been excessive, right? He's like, sometimes people will say the same claim, referring to it as disproportionate, right? It's excessive. And what they think about, and this is where the conversation just gets lost, because that word sounds right. Like, you see all the destruction in Gaza, you see the numbers, and you see what happened on October 7th, and people are like, wow, this is so much more than they did, right? Because the word disproportionate and or excessive, whatever, this has a very precise legal meaning in warfare that almost no one on television bothers to use correctly. Because for Piers Morgan, he means to mean, like, look at how many Gazans have died compared to how many Israelis died on October 7th, which is a comparison of scale. But that's not what proportionality in warfare means in the laws of war. The actual legal definition from Rule 14 of the International Humanitarian Law, that governs warfare and the Geneva Conventions is this: an attack is unlawful if the expected civilian harm is excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated by the strike. Meaning the proportionality is not in relation to what the enemy did. Like, you killed 5 of mine, so if I kill 5 of yours, that's proportional. That's ridiculous. That's not how wars are fought. Is it proportional to what you are trying to accomplish? And kudos to Kemi for bringing up the pager attack as an example of Israel's humanitarian fighting of the war. Because think about this. Imagine if all wars could be fought where the only people that you killed were the actual bad actors on the other side, the king or the generals, the very specific people who are the reason for the war, and there could be no collateral damage whatsoever of civilians. Well, that's generally impossible, and that's why it's understood that in warfare there's going to be collateral damage and there's going to be civilian deaths. There's going to be deaths of people who are innocent. But what if you actually had the technology to target only the guilty parties? Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be the most humane form of warfare? You see, the pager attack in Lebanon was actually the most humane form of warfare, and a lot of people don't realize that, and kudos for Kemi for bringing it up. Anyway, back to this proportionality issue. Proportionality in warfare is not a body count comparison with the two sides. It's not a ratio of casualties. It's an assessment of each specific military action against its military objective. Is it proportional? So if I target if there's a specific building that is a military target because it was used as a rocket launcher and I target it, but instead of just targeting it, I drop bombs that are big enough to destroy the entire neighborhood simultaneously with destroying that building, that's not proportional, because the military goal, the military objective is taking out that building, and I did something disproportionate. You get it? So when Israel targets a building that houses a Hamas command center or a tunnel shaft, the legal question is, given the military value of destroying that target, what was the expected civilian harm, and is it excessive compared to the objective? Okay, you can debate in any specific case, and military and legal experts do, and that's where you have someone like Colonel John Spencer of West Point, who is the expert in urban warfare, who has said repeatedly, he's written numerous articles since October 7th about how Israel has done more than any other army in the world to protect civilians. But if you just point to the death toll and compare it to, in Gaza, compare it to October 7th and say, oh, it's disproportionate, it's excessive, that just misuses the concept entirely. And speaking of that death toll, let's talk about it, because he does say that so many civilians have been killed, and so let's talk about that for a few minutes. And these are, again, for a lot of you, I'm going over things you know, but it's so important to say these things. Regarding the death toll in Gaza, the figures cited constantly in the media come almost exclusively from the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, right? The Henry Jackson Society, I mentioned them before, they published a study that found that over a 4-month period, they took a 4-month period and they studied all of the deaths coming out of Gaza, because lists are provided by the Gaza Health Ministry, and 85% of reporting during that 4-month period of reporting on the civilian deaths that was done during this 4-month period, 85% of all news items of all major media outlets did not distinguish between combatant and civilian deaths. 98% of all the reporting during this 4-month period relied on Hamas-affiliated figures without distinguishing fighters from civilians. Meaning they were whitewashing the fact that it came from Hamas. They weren't even mentioning that it came from Hamas, the numbers. So meaning the media is just using Hamas numbers uncritically. And those become the numbers. Now, you could say that this is a failing of the Israelis for not pushing back and giving alternative numbers and doing a better job fighting the information warfare. And I would agree with a lot of that criticism, but there's reasons for it. That's a separate issue. But you know what happened? In early 2025, Hamas made an update to their official lists, and they removed around 3,400 names from the casualty list. including 1,000 children, because those deaths had never happened. The same update also revealed that 72%, and this did not get much press coverage. Hamas made the update, you see, because you have the Gaza Health Ministry, which actually has some legitimate people in it. I mean, it's a Hamas-run ministry, but you have some people there who are doctors and whatever, and they keep lists of everyone who dies in Gaza, whether it's from the war or not, whether it's from natural causes, and that's another issue. Natural cause death suddenly vanished from the Gaza Strip after October 7th. It's a whole other issue. But what they found is that Hamas updated the lists, and then when the Henry Jackson Society analyzed the lists, approximately 72% of all the fatalities in the combat age range of 13 to 55 were men. Now think about that. Assuming a population is 50-50 men and women, if 72% in that age range, from the teens to the mid-50s, because a lot of the Hamas fighters, unfortunately, are teenagers who are under the age of 18, and therefore they get counted as children. That's another issue. There's a lot of issues here. But 72% were combat age men, the demographic that overlaps with Hamas fighters, right? And they were always claiming that 70% of all casualties were women and children. They directly contradicted themselves. Okay, this was reported by the Jerusalem Post and some other outlets. And you can go find it if you look into the Hamas Health Ministry databases. And I'm not saying that civilian deaths are fine. Every civilian death is terrible, but the conversation, a serious conversation about proportionality or who's at fault, you have to have the correct legal definition of it and an honest discussion about the tactical environment that Hamas created. All right, that's my comment there. Now things get interesting. The rest of this interview, well, what he pivots to here is they talk about Kemi's faith. And this is very interesting. So let's watch this, a bit of a longer clip.
Okay.
One is your faith, which I find really interesting, because you were very open about this recently in an interview with Amol Rajan. You said that you lost your personal belief in God after reading about the Joseph Fritzl case, where this Austrian monster had imprisoned and abused his daughter for 24 years. She'd had to have 7 children by him. And it was a despicable, awful story. And so you had lost your belief in God, but now identified as a cultural Christian. And people were a little bit confused about that, as you know, and debated it a lot. You happen to be married to a practicing Catholic.
Yes. Goes to church every Sunday, he does.
Right, and I believe your kids are all being raised
yes, they're all Catholic. Yes.
And they go to church every Sunday.
Yes.
So what do you do? What is a cultural Christian?
I go to church sometimes, but not very often. But remember, I'm the granddaughter of a Methodist reverend.
Yes.
So I grew up in a Christian family. My grandmother, I tell people my grandmother was born a Muslim. She actually converted to Christianity after she believed she'd witnessed a miracle. I grew up in a very Christian family. And it's...
In Nigeria?
Yes, in Nigeria, my childhood.
I mean, you were born here,
yes,
but then your mother went back to...
Yes, I was born in London, but my childhood was spent in Nigeria. And it's literal there. The Bible is a living word of God. So when I say I lost my faith, it was believing that every single thing in the Bible was true. Because if every single thing in the Bible was true, I don't think what happened to Elizabeth Fritzl.
Well, I think you made the point that you made little prayers to
yes.
God, which God answered about exams and so on. But she had clearly prayed every day to be released from this horror, and had never been released in 24 years. And you were making the point: how can a just God allow those?
Yes,
two things
basically, that why were my prayers answered, but not her prayers? But I am still a cultural Christian because.
Do you pray?
No, but when I say I'm a cultural Christian, that means that the culture of Christianity is one which I think is a force for good. I think churches are a good thing. I think that the work ethic, the Protestant work ethic, which is what Methodists are often most seen about, is very important. I think the Christian values, forgiveness, turning the other cheek, truth-telling, all of those things I think are important. And I think that they are very much part of the culture of this country. I think that this is a Christian country. I don't want to see Christianity disappear. And so even though I might not believe in every single thing that is in the Bible, overall, I think that Christianity is a force for good, and I will fight for it.
Do you think you might rekindle your belief in God, given that the rest of your immediate family are pretty devout by the sound of it?
I don't think faith works like that. I don't think faith works like that.
What, really? No, it does.
Really?
Why absolutely.
Do you think so?
I've heard people who renounce their faith and then something happens and they get it back.
I might need to see the kind of miracle my grandmother saw.
Yeah. Do you think anything would persuade you?
But sometimes I look at how lucky I have been personally. And, the role that I'm in, 10 years ago, I was not even a member of parliament. Now I'm leading the Conservative Party. And, once in a while, you can think, is there someone who is, or is there a being that is directing these things? Those thoughts do cross your mind. So I don't describe myself as an atheist. I describe myself as agnostic. Maybe there is a God, maybe there isn't, but I will try and live my life according to certain values, which are Christian values. But I'm not going to use the Bible as a textbook for how to be in government or what rules and regulations should come in. And I think that most people in the country are probably in that space, that there is a cultural Christianity, go to church, not just for weddings and funerals, Christmas and Easter, when something momentous is happening. And I am bringing my children up in that. But I also, I believe in being honest. And I cannot pretend that I believe in God when I don't believe in God, when I am agnostic about his existence. I'm somebody who, even when it's painful, I will tell the truth. If I'm telling you something, that what I say I mean. I think that that's really important in politicians. People are so disillusioned by politicians saying things so that they can get votes. So I'm not going to tell people that I believe in something just to get their votes. I want them to know what I do believe. So I'm a cultural Christian. I believe in culture a lot. I think we talk a lot about values, but not enough about culture. And I think we have a great culture in this country. We're at risk of losing it if we don't preserve it. So I fight for churches. I want to see them fixed. I want more money going into preserving churches, which are actually often a repository of the history of every village, especially in the countryside and in rural areas. They tell a story about who we are and maybe where we're going.
There are people like Tommy Robinson.
Okay. Then they're going to go off and talk about Tommy Robinson, some other things I don't want to talk about the rest of the interview. I thought this was a very interesting exchange here because, first of all, she mentioned that she lost her faith in God because of this case where there was this girl who was being horribly abused by her father for many, many years and had prayed numerous times to be released from that and was not. And therefore she felt that, how could a just God allow that to happen? And this is a kind of classic theodicy issue. That's the technical word, which is the question of divine justice. How could righteous people suffer? And here's, I can't judge someone who loses their faith because they encounter what appears to be unjust suffering, like the classic example of there are many Holocaust survivors who lost their faith in God because they looked at the Holocaust and said, how could this happen? How could this cruelty happen? And people lose their faith because of suffering, or they see, there's a child born with a terrible disease at birth and they're obviously innocent. And how could they possibly be suffering? How could there be a just God? And they lose their faith in God. So I don't want to judge that as an emotional reaction, but it is worth talking about theologically. Because, again, if a person is going to emotionally have trouble with God because of that, they're going to have an issue with God because of that, I get it. But theologically, it doesn't hold water. Let me explain. First of all, the Bible itself discusses this question extensively. There's an entire lengthy book in the Bible called the Book of Job, which is all about the story of a person who is suffering, who it states quite clearly does not deserve any of the suffering that he's receiving, and he suffers horribly. That's what the book is. It's a book about suffering. And the entire book he's struggling with it, he's trying to understand it, and he's talking to his friends, and there's the question of losing faith, and he doesn't lose his faith, but he still is struggling with it, and he wonders, and the answer is never revealed to him. It's an interesting situation. As the reader of the book of Job, at the beginning, you know exactly why he's suffering. It has to do with this wager that God makes, or this debate, so to speak, between God and the Satan. And at the end, God doesn't tell Job that God gives a speech to Job at the end of the book, just saying to him, you don't understand me. How could you think you could understand me? And for some reason, Job is satisfied with that answer. But be that as it may, my point here is that the Bible never promised us that there wouldn't be suffering at the individual level that we do not understand. Never promised us that. The only places where God says, if you're good, you'll be prosperous. If you're bad, you'll get punished, is when he's talking to the collective, to the nation. Like the curses at the end of the book of Leviticus or the curses at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. They're spoken to the people as a nation. Or earlier in the book of Deuteronomy, where it says that if what Jews know to be the second paragraph of the Shema that we say twice a day. But it's a passage in Deuteronomy which talks about how if we observe the commandments, we're going to have prosperity and everything's going to be good. And if we don't observe the commandments, everything's going to be bad and we're going to go into exile. That is speaking to the collective. On the individual level, the Bible never promises us a just system. And it can't. What do you mean it can't? It can't. Let me explain. Imagine if we lived in a world. Imagine if we lived in a world where only wicked people suffered and people who were righteous prospered. And there was none of these injustices. What would happen? Well, it would be a horrible world, because but if that's the way God governed the world at the level of individuals, where wicked people did not prosper, righteous people never suffered, no one ever suffered unjustly, we would have just destroyed the whole concept of virtue. We would have destroyed good and evil, basically. We would have reduced it only to crass pragmatism. Because my incentive for doing good would simply be because it pays. I won't suffer, I won't get sick, nothing bad will happen to me if I'm good. And my disincentive for doing evil things is also extremely pragmatic. Why would I do an evil thing? I'm just going to get sick, it's not going to work out, life's going to be bad if I do bad things. So there's no more righteousness. We've just destroyed good and evil. So God has to allow us to choose good for the sake of virtue. And he has to allow a certain number of wicked people to prosper and a certain number of righteous people to suffer. He has to allow that in order to preserve what really matters in life, which is meaningful choices and achieving virtue. That's right. That's the whole purpose of the system. Let me go further, though. She said that she lost her faith because God didn't answer the prayers of this girl who was being brutalized by her father. This wasn't an act of God. Someone was doing evil to someone else. It's like the Holocaust question. Again, I don't want to judge emotionally people who say, how could God have let that happen? But God does not step in and stop human beings from making evil choices. He doesn't do that. Again, it's like the other issue about if you lived in a world where no righteous people suffered and no wicked people prospered. It would be a destruction of free will. It would take away the human agency, the pure freedom of the human being to be good or evil. If God stepped in and stopped us, that means that he stacked the deck in the choices of good and evil. And yes, that means that people are going to suffer as a result of that. And that's a terrible thing. But it's interesting, like if the Bible said in it that everything in the world is always going to be governed purely justly in a way that we understand in the immediate, in what we see in front of us, in this world, it will be perfectly humanly understandable justice. If God had said that, if God had said in the Bible that righteous people will always prosper and wicked people will always suffer, if God had said that in the Bible, then yes, lose your faith over these issues. But actually, the Bible says the opposite. The Bible includes an allowance for evil people to do evil, cruel things to each other. It allows that. It allows for there to be a system of divine justice that we don't understand and that we don't see. So I sympathize with Kemi, but it doesn't really hold water theologically. I thought that was worth pointing out. It's also interesting. She talks about this cultural Christianity, which, again, it's true that the values of Western civilization are Christian values, and not enough attention is paid to that. The problem is that if you reduce it to cultural Christianity, you're already halfway out the door, because that's not going to be transmissible to children. People are not going to fight for that in their own private lives. They're not going to fight for that. It's not a conviction. It's not a belief. It's not a strong enough belief, cultural Christianity. So I appreciate what she's saying, and she's right. We need to preserve the Christian ethos of these Western nations, which is slipping away. But I don't know, cultural Christianity is probably not going to do it. Anyway, these are some of my thoughts on this. Overall, I really like Kemi. I think she's straight talking. I like her positions on Israel. I think it would be a really good sign if she comes to power in the next election, because she seems to have her head screwed on right. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. God bless.